I worked at Major Market for a little bit more than a year, and I recently joined Skrill. And today I'm going to talk about front-end architecture. So before we start with new architecture, well, let's have a look at the old days. Well, that was easy. We used to have an MVC framework, and the best we could have. Right.
Yeah, that's the way.
Is there any?
No, more that.
You want to try? That's the best I can do, really, unless you guys want to play with. Just right. Okay. So we used to have jQuery, and everything was okay. So it was just a little bit of announcing what we had in the MVC. So as front-end developer, my day, I used to spend my day here, and I wasn't allowed to touch anything else. And then around 2013, then we had what I call JS revolution. So we had frameworks like Backbone and Knockout, and those basically introduced a new way to structure our application where we still had the MVC framework, but we also had more dynamic JavaScript front-end. And then today the things has changed quite drastically. Instead of having an MVC framework, what we have is an API, and then everything else, the MVC, is actually moved from the server to the client. And I don't know if you can read, but it says shiny AngularJS. So everybody's pretty excited about it, right? It's just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And apparently it scales so well because it's static HTML. And we have a perfect API, right? A perfect REST API. Looks okay? But if we look at the architecture a little bit more carefully, what we have is what I assume is a REST API on the backend and a pure front end, which is actually loading the application. So if we dig a little bit into it, and let's say now we want to build this application, what we found out is that, well, the first thing we need to sort out is how do we authenticate, right? When we used to have the MVC, well, the MVC was doing it, was reading the page and saying, well, yeah, you can get in, and yes, you're allowed to see this page. But now we can load Angular, right? But is Angular going to decide, well, I can always get that JavaScript, right? I can always, find a trait and make it work. Well, I know these effects. I can build the authentication endpoint in the API layer, right? So now I've got my REST API endpoint and a little, a small endpoint which is actually looking after the authentication. What do I do with all the rest, right? When I load the application, I probably need other things. I need probably settings from the user. I need the session for each one. I need user profile. So if you think about it, what happens is I load the application. So before I load the application, I need the HTML page, all the assets, the JavaScript, the CSS. Now I load the application, and the first thing I need to do, this is a REST API, so I assume we're going to have 3 endpoints, one for the session, one for the user, and another one for the config. So suddenly I need to do 3 more calls before I can even show you anything on the screen. As you can imagine, this is taking it to an extreme. So perhaps we want to do just 1 call, or perhaps print all this information directly in the HTML, so we don't need to do this extra call. So we can show the page straight away. Well, that's easy, right? We can just add a bootstrap endpoint into the API and we're done. So now a perfect REST API, it's a perfect REST API, a little bit of authentication, and a bootstrap endpoint, so we can get the application out faster. So what do we do with validation? Well, there are some cases, and you can think about CAPTCHA, where we can't really trust the user on the UI, right? So we can't really build a CAPTCHA solution in Angular. We need to have the CAPTCHA solution in the backend. So what do? Very, very easy. We move the business logic in the API layer. Okay? what about cross-origin requests? So I assume that in this architecture, right, we have this perfect REST API layer, which is deployed on API blah blah blah.com, and then we have the UI somewhere else. That's great. The problem with JavaScript is that it's quite tricky to do cross-origin requests, right? So, and for example, with IH, you can't do that unless you get around tricky things. So what we do is to support IE8, or we want to be sure that everything's going to work without exposing our service API to the world. Easy stuff. We add something else to the API. Okay, so in this case, we add a transparent proxy, so we go directly from the main to the API service. So same stuff for auth credentials, right? So if we do need to authenticate the user, where do you store the client ID and the secret ID? Well, you should store those in the client, but actually, client I can inspect anytime I want. So what about if I want an API which is WebSockets and it's not a JSON API? What about if I want to batch API calls? Or what about if I want to filter, enhance the API? Or if I want to do data validation which is secure, not client side? That's easy. You can answer the okay? But hey, it's still pure CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, right? And this is our okay. So what is happening at the moment is that when we had that architecture, we had a logic in the MVC that now it's somehow it's basically nowhere. So the front end is actually driven the way you build the API. So if Angular demands things, so for example, if Angular demands things in certain way, certain response status type in the HTTP code, or JSON response needs to be in a certain way, that your front end is actually driving the way you structure the API. So when we said about, we're going to group these three calls, the user session, the profile, and the configuration in one unique call, just because we want to bootstrap in one single call. That's basically the front end dictating how you build the API. So you can see already the coupling of these two things together. Also the logic, we start building product-specific logic inside this API, which is a REST API, but a lot of other pieces are plugged in together. But if you go and ask the developers, what they say is, whoa, slow down, this is just an exception. It's very, very small, and we're not going to do it again. This is the last time. Okay? And if you ask them, who is responsible for that code? Well, if you go to the backend developer, they're going to say, whoa, that's front-end stuff, right? And then you go to the backend developer, to the front-end developer, and ask, well, who is responsible for that? Well, that's in the API, that's not mine, right? So it's not that easy after all, right? So what if we could have our API as API without all the extra complexity, and we move that extra complexity somewhere? We will solve one problem, which is, I've got a REST API, predictable, I know how to use it, there are no custom endpoints for bootstrapping or anything like that. What if I could extract also the logic which is product specific and, hide it somewhere else, perhaps in a service, perhaps in multiple services. So if I've got like a Node service which is actually consumed by other applications. Yeah, I know it sounds a little bit of, microservices. So, but it's not quite the same. So one of the things which is quite interesting is that if we start moving this logic from within the API to outside, we get quite a lot of flexibility. And why we have, well, and that's basically what we get if we add a third layer in this architecture. So this third layer is basically what we used to have in the VC. Instead of being hidden inside the API, has got a place between your UI and backend API. So it works like just a transparent proxy. It does a little bit more than that. If you want, you can basically aggregate and manipulate and remix API the way you want. So in this case, Node.js is my presentation layer of choice, but it could work with anything else. So it's Node.js, right? This is not frontend. This is backend, right? We're just moving the problem, right? We're not talking about frontend stuff. Well, this is how we do frontend. This is seriously how we change from doing jQuery stuff in the MVC to how we do proper scalable software today. Having a presentation layer enable us to create more powerful architecture because we can decide how to expose the API to the front end. So if a particular framework dictates a certain type of API calls, then we can isolate the logic and we can build that logic in the presentation layer. So these two things are tightly coupled, but for a good reason, because they do the same thing. So we can also change how the API are made, because this is still, it's encapsulated in the presentation layer. We can drop APIs if we want. This architecture, it's basically what we're doing. We're using a public API here, but we're building a private API which is just for the application we're building. So we don't need to keep version on anything like that. We can just drop the API if we want to. We have flexibility to do so. The logic is encapsulated inside the presentation layer, which basically means if tomorrow my Angular application becomes a little bit of data, then I drop the entire service and build a new one, right? I don't need to go and mess around with what I've got, because the logic is already encapsulated in the microservices. And I've got data validation server side, and I can do scaling more easily. So in this case, you could have in some scenario, you could have multiple front ends supporting just one instance of the backend API. So you can basically decide how you're going to scale. So you get more granularity. You can decide if you're going to go with cookies. Is it a web application? Let's go with cookies. Is it mobile? Let's go JWT. I don't need cores anymore. And it doesn't work just for the mobile. So I can create this presentation layer. It doesn't work just for the web. I can create this presentation layer for mobile too. And it doesn't end there. I mean, those are just the things that I can see front end, but from the back end perspective, you know, I can finally build a very focused API which does REST and REST only, and it's predictable. And because we are empowered to choose the right technology, we can also build API that provides things like WebSockets, so we can get better UX. In essence, everybody wins. And we also get visibility, which is quite important. So if you think about it, if you want to analyze how the application works and what kind of application, services we are using, it's all there. Whereas if everything is inside the API, it's a little bit more hidden. But yeah, it doesn't come. There are some drawbacks. As in, you know, it's very, very powerful, but you need to be responsible. So it's another, you know, deployable. It's another application that we need to, you know, manage. We need to test. We need to benchmark. It's a point of failure. It doesn't come for free, right? Whereas the application we had before, where we thought it had just HTML and CSS, that could have been delivered through the CDN. And yeah, it doesn't make sense if you're building to-do apps. This is definitely not the architecture I would suggest to build a to-do app. So what does it look like? So one of the projects we implemented the architecture was a real-time update platform. So I know it's very light, but the way it works, so we've got an old server, a REST API endpoint which provides So we talked about news, provide all the news, and then we got RabbitMQ. And then at the time we had a Nancy application, so .NET, and Angular on top of it. So in here we don't have WebSockets, but this is real time, and we wanted to have the best experience we could possibly think of. So what we did is basically we encapsulated some logic in this presentation layer, which basically means what it does. When an Angular application is loaded, then it requests some parameters to the presentation layer, which does a bunch of calls to the other services. It creates a queue, RabbitMQ, and then creates a connection here to WebSockets. So what is that basically happening here is when a message is published to the queue, it gets also published to the frontend as well. So the backend doesn't know about WebSockets and doesn't need to know. And the beauty of this architecture is that later what we did is said, well, I would like to have these notifications, anytime. So what we did is we got another presentation layer, this time built in Node.js, consume the key again, and we built a Chrome extension. So every time we got a news, we got a pop-up appearing on screen. So another project we implemented was a PDF subscription service. This time we decided to go for Node.js and server-side start rendering of pages with a little bit of jQuery. In this case, every time we hit a Node server, that goes and does a bunch of calls to all the other services, so the authorization server, and then the user profile server, and the rest API endpoint. Saying when you download a document, then we have a fourth server as well. So you can see how the custom logic for aggregating this API is isolating in this layer. Last one, which I want to show you today, is about how this applies to other platforms as well. So this is another application I work with. So we had a front-end application written in backbone, powered by Node.js, consuming some API endpoint here. So we had authorization server, and then RabbitMQ, and then generic service. And then that one consume all three of them and provide a user interface. Then we've got another presentation layer which connects to RabbitMQ and provide notification for mobile devices. And then finally we have a presentation layer for the mobile device as well. So when you load the application, you can actually load the data and use the application. So if you were to change the front end for something else, well, we could add a new presentation layer and we can create another app. So we can spin up as many apps as we want. So this is nothing new. I mean, I'm not inventing a new pattern, a new architecture. This is what we use every day. And we're not the only one using it. There are companies like Netflix that have hundreds of devices, and they use the same technology to actually limit the number of calls they do. So as an example, PlayStation Network and Netflix does one single call, and that goes to an adapter written in Ruby, which does 50 other calls, which are then aggregated and sent back. So they have an adapter for each of the devices they support, so they can basically tailor the API calls. They can tailor the API calls to that particular device. So why don't we go? Thank you very much. You're not allowed to ask questions.
Am I really not allowed to ask questions? That is a question.
Any question?
Can I steal your talk? Can I steal your talk?
If you want,
There are people on my project that need to.
I understand this is really common. That
No, it's really basic shit, but they need to know.
I know this is really common since Angular basically took over the front-end world. So if you want me to come for a brown bank section during lunchtime, just let me know. I'm happy to join. And yeah.
What about alternatives to Node to services like that?
Yeah, so like I said, one of the application we built, we tried Nazi, so .NET Sinatra-like framework. Matt tried Groovy. I don't think it really matters, as in you should choose what's best for yourself. I think Node has some strengths, as in the ecosystem for front-end development is very, very strong. So that and it's also in high dependency, as in all the front-end tooling is in Node. So it would make sense to keep everything in Node. But if you think that you can't use Node because perhaps the company you're working for, the client you're working with doesn't want to use Node, you can use any microservice. You can use any language or any platform you can think of.
Is anyone, do you know if anyone's tried Vertex?
So if your question was more about the I/O nature of Node, I think that comes with some good benefit, as in it's quite interesting for that sort of stuff. But I think at that I wouldn't be too worried about the async nature. Perhaps if you ask Oliver, he'd say yes, you have to go I/O. But for me, it's more about how we encapsulate the logic and how we make sure that in 2 years' time or in a year's time, when we move to something else, we can actually drop that layer and start something new, rather than if you had everything in one single API block, then you would need to understand who is using that API, how do I deprecate the API, it would be a little bit more complex.
Are there any modules you find yourself using repeatedly or regularly?
I guess I tend, I've been doing this for a while. I think there are some pattern relevant modules that are coming up quite frequently. So I use a lot of Express because I use a lot of Node.js, and I noticed that the pattern you tend to use, you create modules around the API. So for example, in the example where I had 4 API services, like in this case, my code, I can see that there are models for each one of them, and then I rewrite them. But other than that, no, there aren't any specific module that I'm really using. I guess no. Yes.
Do you do many front ends through Node? Like, do you use any template languages through Node, or do you tend to do that all through Angular?
So I noticed that lately I'm doing a little bit more than static side rendering. That's because the kind of projects I'm involved with don't necessarily need a lot of. They don't have a lot of dynamism. They're not very interactive, and most of the clients, they're really, really keen to go for Angular, even if there is no need for it. But if there is no need for it, I mean, the front-end stuff is really complex the way it is. There is no way I'm going to add more complexity to it by adding a framework underneath.
So the things you mentioned, validation, cause, and the other things you mentioned, are they common enough that you could actually extract out a framework from that? Because what else would middleware know other middleware from?
I think there are 2 things. One is the services you could extract. So, for example, a null service is necessary, and then you can, for example, reuse that whole service to provide different interfaces, things like cookies, and JSON tokens, and so on and so forth. And then there are other things like libraries. So what we found, and one of the clients we work with is that we had this client library to use the old server, and we use that for all the Node.js presentation layer we've got. So what we did is isolate that code and write a package for it, and we're basically using that as a Node module in all the project we've got.
You've obviously covered this from a front-end perspective. We've gone through the whole single page app with Angular and whatnot to get to this. But if you go right back to the beginning, your first diagram, where you've got MVC and some jQuery across the top, model V control here, the model can come from anywhere. So this is kind of assuming that you just suck it out of a database probably, you write some sort of DAO there. But if you split that MVC there, so you've got a very thin controller layer, a controller app, and you've got a REST service backing that, and an auth service and whatever, and those things are coming over some sort of over-the-wire connection, be it REST interfaces, or even in the olden times you did EJBs, and so whatever, it doesn't matter, it's just somewhere else. Then you end up with the same architecture you've got to at the end of that, don't you? Just with the controller that's written in something more like Java or Scala or Groovy or whatever.
You could do that. So one thing is, yeah, this is nothing new. And the other thing is, well, yeah, this is just a way about you go and structure your application. So I guess you could do it, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this is what I'm suggesting as well. I mean, what I'm saying is that the only things we are doing, the only clever things we are doing, is we are moving the problem from in here to be separated somewhere else. We still need to have the code. It's just about the visibility and the encapsulation. That's the only thing, I guess, that are pressing issue for me.
I think part of it perhaps comes back to the shifting of responsibilities as well, that the controller written by a front-end developer might be more suited to the display of the view than a controller written by someone who's also writing the service layer, perhaps.
But you didn't know the CFO, so.
I did.
Do we have a blurring lines now between front-end developer and back-end developer? Should we?
Yes, we do.
Say yes.
My answer would be no. but I think what is architecture? I think this is a good point. I think architecture is empowering front-end developers a little bit more to take ownership of the application and to go more into the back side of things. So I see that as necessary nowadays, that we do this sort of really flashy UI on front end. But I think it's also a way, it's also how I see the front end development evolving during the years. So I would expect more front-endy people to move inside, to move to the back end and start this sort of stuff.
It's really scary. Scary in the not scary way.
On the flip side of that, I've seen the evolution of overall developers becoming more back-end developers. Instead of, like, we're not allowed to touch front-end anymore, which we used to be. And now it's...
to be honest, in my experience, I find quite the opposite. So people used to be just back-end, they get really interested about Node and say, what's this new toy? And how do I use it? And then they get more in touch with the front end. The other downside is that because front end is so big right now, and it's getting bigger, right? Perhaps people get more interested about the back end and JavaScript, and we've got less and less front end developers interested in the other side, which is HTML and CSS. But I guess that's just the way the front end is evolving.
Seeing as I'm not allowed to ask a question, a comment that kind of brings you cookies are very much a browser problem. They're a horrible format that you really wouldn't want to support in REST API. And the simplest implementation of this could be a kind of custom logic that takes a cookie that's great for the browser, rubbish for the REST API, transfers the format, it puts it in an authorization header and sends it off. It then proxies a response back. So there's some jobs here that whether we say it's kind of front end, whether we say it's back end, whatever, there are some requirements the browser has that we don't want spreading around the system. And this is a great way of encapsulating some of that. It's not a question.
Just out of interest, is anyone doing something similar or to this sort of stuff? Or are you more close to the Angular JS word, sort of perfect REST API? Your hands up if you're doing the Angular JS REST API. Okay. What about if you're doing presentation layering? Okay, gotcha.
You're doing API. Yeah, I'm doing an API in presentation.
I have a question, just a little off topic. How often do you really need to debug a Node.js process because of memory leaks? Are there any like tools like to do that
So your question is about memory leaks in Node?
yeah, like you want to debug, something's happening, you have like a production workload, and it's just basically memory leaks. It's the most common issue that I've experienced by myself.
So this is a little bit more non-specific. So there are tools. There are tools to inspect the heap of the E8 to figure out where it's leaking. It's not a pleasant experience, not so. It's quite hard to debug memory leaks, and I can tell you the tools to actually go out and do that, but it's a tedious process.
But the ecosystem kind of got better, and today there are those tools, and
Yeah, there are other tools for Node. There are a little bit more tools for IO.js, particularly on Linux. There is a little bit better tooling for performance and memory consumption and memory leaks. But in general, yeah, performance on Node.js and memory leaks are quite niche. Not a lot of people invest time in it. It's not that no one does it, it's just that it's very, very niche, and there aren't a lot of tools around.
So you just throw more machine.
Not really, you'll find where the leak is. I mean, if you write, well, I guess there are ways to get at it, but yeah. To be honest, we've been working with Node for the last 2.5 years, and in the last year we even had memory leaks. Perhaps one at the very beginning, and that was related with RabbitMQ and the library used by RabbitMQ. That's it. Thank you very much.